everybody. I was going to get to that. Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait for a few more people to log on to the call before we get started with this morning's presentation. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Megan Tate, and I'm the Director of Community Grants for the Winnipeg Foundation, and we're so pleased to have you all join us this morning for a presentation about the upcoming intake of one-time community grants. I want to start off this morning by saying, although we're not gathered together in person, I still want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Treaty 1 territory, which is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I invite all of you to reflect on the land that supports your participation in today's presentation. So some of you would have heard this session is being recorded and it will be made available on our website if you want to watch it again or if you want to share it with colleagues who weren't able to be here. I also want to note that this is a live interpretation from English to ASL, and this is not a pre-recorded edited translation. So we're so pleased to have Sandra join us today. Finally, just a note that everyone on the call will be muted. If you have any questions, we've saved some time at the end of the presentation. You can message your questions to our hosts this morning, either Mercy or Carrie, and they'll say those questions out loud to me at the end of the presentation and we'll have an opportunity to answer them then. So a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. First, I'll just be sharing a little bit of information about the Winnipeg Foundation. Some of you may have heard it before, and some of this will be new information for you. A little bit about how our overall responsive granting works at the Winnipeg Foundation, and then we'll dig into the details of our upcoming one-time community grants intake, including our application form, our process, what we look for in an application, and then, as I mentioned, we'll save some time at the end for some Q&A. So a little bit about us, the Winnipeg Foundation. We're always so proud to say that we're Canada's first community foundation, built from people from all walks of life to support all different kinds of charitable activity in our community. There's now 190 community foundations from coast to coast to coast, all across Canada, including 55 right here in Manitoba. Our vision is a Winnipeg where community life flourishes for all. And many of you might remember that 2021, the Winnipeg Foundation celebrated our 100th anniversary of working in our community. Wasn't quite the anniversary we had planned, but still proud to celebrate that milestone. And we're currently undertaking a strategic plan that's going to see us through to our next 100 years. So what makes us a community foundation is our donors. Oh, I went too fast. Sorry about that. What makes us a community foundation is our donors. So donors from all walks of life make gifts to the Winnipeg Foundation. We're a collection of more than 4,000 permanent endowment funds established over the past 101 years. Each fund has its own trust conditions to ensure that donors' wishes are respected, and we do take our stewardship role very seriously. Those endowed funds are pooled and invested, and we grant a portion of the income earned each year based on our spending policy. In 2022, our spending rate was 5%. That may change for 2023, but our spending policy has been designed to minimize the impact of market fluctuations on our granting. So a little bit about our granting. You may have noticed back in January, it feels so long ago, that we announced $84.9 million in granting to 1,100 charities. This increase in our grant making over the previous year was due largely to increased donor dollars to support COVID and reallocating some funds that we had set aside for our centennial that we also reallocated to COVID projects. And so I think it's important to note that these numbers reflect all payments, grant payments made by the foundation, including scholarships, agency funds, managed funds, special projects, and more. Our responsive grants last year, that's grants made in response to applications from community organizations like yours, represent 22% of the total. And so the bar chart you see on your screen outlines how our grant dollars were allocated in 2021. And as you can see, responsive grants was $18.4 million. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Winnipeg Foundation's COVID-19 community response. First of all, we recognize that COVID is still with us and still impacting our community, its needs, and the services that charitable organizations provide. But I'll recap a little bit our grant response to COVID, just to put it into the context of one-time community grants. So very early in the pandemic, the foundation distributed $3.8 million in emergency support to local charities through the foundation's COVID-19 emergency grants, as well as the Government of Canada's emergency community support grants. And that was really to support immediate needs of those frontline organizations who were providing support to community members. The next phase was our stabilization grants, which were offered in 2020 and 2021. And this was a standalone responsive grant program that provided unrestricted funding totaling nearly $17 million in combined 2020 and 2021. And finally, last year, we thought we could see a recovery phase for our community, but early in 2022, we understood that we still needed to be flexible and adaptable to the ever-changing situation in our community. So through ADAPT grants, we provided $4.6 million, again, in unrestricted funding to help charities face increasingly uncertain futures. Many of these applications were for staffing, for staff training, programming pivots, organizational restructuring, projects that would help organizations adapt to the future. On an ongoing basis, we know that COVID will still have an impact on our community and on our community organizations. So there's still going to be COVID-related needs. So like last year, we'll accept one-time community grant applications that do have a connection to COVID, either how you're serving community or for your own organization's needs. And we'll get into more detail about that in a moment. So I wanted to give you a quick outline of our 2023 calendar of responsive grant intakes. As we enter a new phase of the pandemic and a new strategic plan for the foundation, our granting calendar is going to look a little bit different in 2023. With the caveat, this is what we're planning now, but it is subject to change according to the needs of our community. So first, we're planning 2 intakes of one-time community grants next year, March 2023 and October 2023. That's in addition to the October 2022 intake that's coming up shortly. I do want to note that organizations may submit 1 application per calendar year, so groups will have to choose which intake best meets their needs. And I do also want to note that we will be starting in 2023, reinstating our requirement that organizations complete a project and submit a final report prior to submitting a new application. So for example, if you apply this October and your application is successful, that will impact, or that could impact your timeline for subsequent applications. Once again, we'll be hosting an intake for major capital grants. And I just want to note that the stage 1 application date is slightly earlier than it has been last year. So stage 1 applications for major capital grants will be on May 1st, 2023. And of course, closer to that date, we will have a dedicated information session for those projects and those applications. Finally, I just want to take note that many of our special program grant intakes have changed and are going to look a little bit different in 2023. We're really working to streamline intakes and reduce the number of applications organizations have to complete to receive funding. So watch for a calendar to be released later this month. We'll be sure to send it to our e-news subscribers. And of course, as always, we'll post it on our website. So a little bit about us as a project funder. As a project funder, our responsive grants can support a broad range of projects on a time-limited basis, typically 1 year. We know that organizations need stable, ongoing operating support, which is increasingly rare. So while our project funder model cannot meet this need, the trade-off is we're able to be flexible, support innovative ideas, and respond quickly to changing community needs. The process of applying for a grant is always competitive, with demand exceeding the funding that we have available. But in a few minutes, I'll share what it looks like to submit a successful proposal. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just wanted to share with you all a list of our special program grants. More detailed information on each of these programs can be found on our website. It is important to note that organizations can apply for a grant under each of these special granting programs, as well as a community grant. However, requests must be for different projects. And like all Winnipeg Foundation grant programs, only registered charities can apply, and projects must primarily benefit the citizens of Winnipeg. The one exception to that is our Literacy for Life grant program, which is a province-wide initiative. And just to reiterate that each granting program has its own timelines and criteria. So your best option always is to check the website for more detailed information. So on to one-time community grants. So these grants, again, come from endowments created by donors from all walks of life, primarily from what we call our community funds. And those are funds where donors have made a gift to the foundation and asked us to allocate it to whatever the most urgent need is in our community at any given time. We also have fields of interest funds where donors have identified a particular area where they want their support to go, but still leave it at the discretion of the foundation's board of directors to allocate. And finally, some donor advisors are choosing to be involved in selecting projects to support through our one-time community grants process. So they'll look at summaries of applications that come through the community grants program and identify projects they might be interested in supporting. One-time community grants is our main and most general granting program. Once again, in 2022, we anticipate a lot of applications and a very competitive grants round. For context, last year we received 243 applications with requests totaling $12.6 million. Ultimately, we were able to support about 65% of the applications and 32% of the requested amount. So just to give you a bit of context there. So a bit of an overview on our one-time community grants. Again, these grants support projects for a definite period of time. Requests can be up to $100,000, but an average grant is around $35,000. You can apply for subsequent years of support for a project that has already been supported. One-time community grants is just our way of saying this program does not provide ongoing or operational indefinite funding. A note about the due date: normally the October 1st is our due date, but because that falls on a Saturday, we will accept applications until the end of the following business day, which is October 3rd at 4:30 p.m. That is a firm deadline, so we ask you all just to make a note of that October 3rd. 4:30 p.m. deadline for applications. I mentioned that it was our main and most diverse granting program. And so being a project funder does provide us with the flexibility to support a wide range of projects. So through our one-time community grants, we can support capital and renovations. So that's a range of infrastructure projects, everything from replacing flooring to going towards construction of a new facility or an addition. We support conferences and events such as performances, festivals, anniversary celebrations, or special exhibitions. With the caveat, we don't fund fundraising events such as dinners. We provide grants for equipment and infrastructure. This could be computers, furnishings, websites. As part of your application, if you're asking for equipment and infrastructure, we ask you to provide at least 2 quotes from suppliers to go along with your application. And it's always helpful if you're replacing existing equipment or furnishings, just to let us know how long you've had that speaks to evidence of need. We also provide program operating grants. So that's the costs of a specific program, typically a pilot program or a demonstration project. And this can include staffing and other program costs, including up to 15% of the administrative costs of running a program. We also provide grants for reports and planning. That can include strategic plans, fundraising plans, evaluations, business plans. We do make grants towards capital campaigns as well, both through our one-time community grants or through our major capital grants. We do provide support under special circumstances. We'll consider grant requests for short-term operating support or bridge funding. And we'd always invite you to discuss specific short-term operating needs with the Director of Community Grants, which is me. We also provide organizational development and capacity building support. This could include board development, strategic planning, evaluations, and some interim or short-term operating funding again. And finally, to note that COVID-related needs could fall into any of the above categories. Receiving a COVID grant, either a stabilization grant or an ADAPT grant, does not preclude you from applying for COVID-related needs again this year. However, as always, your grant history will be a factor in our grants committee's decision-making. A little bit about the things that we don't support. So we don't make grants to individuals. We don't fund project costs that were incurred prior to the grant's decision. We don't provide grants for annual fundraising campaigns or events. We don't fund paying down mortgages or reducing deficits. We don't support political activities or exclusively religious activities. We recognize that many faith-based organizations provide community services, but we don't fund exclusively religious activities. And finally, we don't provide grants to other grant-making programs. So we wouldn't fund another funder to make grants themselves. So that's just a bit of a list of ineligible programs. So in this next section, I'm going to share a little bit about what we look for in a grant application. So first up is eligibility. First, only registered charities are eligible to apply for a grant to the Winnipeg Foundation. So you must have a registered charity number from CRA. Projects must primarily benefit the people of Winnipeg. And so if your organization is located outside the city, you must make a strong case for how people in Winnipeg will benefit. I have a little asterisk next to this point. Another eligibility is looking at satisfactory reporting on previous community grants. But again, noting that this eligibility criteria is being waived for the September 22, October 22 intake. And I do also want to note that, again, the COVID stabilization and ADAPT grants were separate granting programs, and receiving one of those grants does not impact your ability to apply for a one-time community grant. And finally, grants are not made retroactively. So grants received in this intake will be decided on in February. The grants committee will not consider costs incurred before they meet to make those granting decisions. So some of the assessment criteria used by our grants committee. We look at, or they look at both the organization and the project being proposed. So some of the organizational considerations include your track record. So, success of previous projects, but if your organization is new to the foundation, it's always helpful to provide some examples of some of the successes you've had. Grant history is always a factor in decision-making, so your grant history with the Winnipeg Foundation. We also look at an organization's capacity to contribute to the project. This could be cash or in-kind support to the project. And site visits where applicable. So normally our grants associates would conduct site visits where they need more information. Depending on the public health situation at the time, these may be in person or via phone or video. But site visits are an opportunity for us to get to know the organization and the project and collect information for our grants committee. So just to note that having a site visit from a member of the grants team does not necessarily mean your application will be approved, but it is a way for us to get to know your organization a little bit better. So some of the project considerations, we're looking for clear goals and activities. So clarity, has the project been well thought out? We're looking to learn more about the benefit to community. So this could include the depth of the project. Will it impact individuals, families, a whole neighborhood? We're looking at the needs of the population being served. So evidence of need for a project could include stats, community surveys, or needs assessments. We're also looking for congruency or alignment between a project and an organization's mission. So if this project represents a shift away from your organization's mission, it's helpful for you to explain kind of the purpose behind it. And you might want to include why your board of directors has decided to go in this direction. And finally, we're looking for support from other funders. Are there any other funders who are contributing to this project? So those are a few of the assessment criteria we use. In addition, depending on the project, we're looking at the qualifications of staff or volunteers who will be delivering the program. Do they have the expertise to take it on? We're looking to know more about consultation or collaboration if applicable. Are you working with others on the implementation of the project? Budget is a big one. We're looking for a realistic budget. It's also helpful for us to know if the project can go ahead if you don't receive the full amount requested from the foundation. Sometimes we'll seek out perspectives of community experts and other funders if that's relevant. So as part of our research, we may reach out to our funder peers to learn a little bit more. Just some other considerations. If it's a really large project in particular, we would be looking for the participation of other funders. If your project is working with diverse populations, we want to ensure that you've demonstrated cultural competency has been taken into consideration as part of the delivery of that project. And finally, if you're proposing a construction or a renovation project, has accessibility been considered as part of the plans for that project? We're also looking to ensure that organizations adhere to the effective practices followed by their sector. We don't have our own set of effective practices because, of course, we serve a diverse group of community organizations, but we want to know that you're adhering to the effective practices followed by your sector. Again, where relevant, projects' impact on the environment will be considered. And finally, to note that grants are not typically made for projects that are the primary responsibility of municipal, provincial, or federal government. So an example of a government responsibility would be funding a nursing position in a hospital or a teacher in a classroom. Those are the types of things we wouldn't fund. So a little bit about collaborations. So an organization may submit one community grant application per calendar year, as I've mentioned. However, a second application is accepted in the case of a collaboration. And so we have a fairly specific definition of collaboration. So that is when two or more registered charities or a registered charity and a nonprofit organization are jointly planning and implementing a project. For-profit businesses are not considered collaborative partners in this case. And as part of that collaboration, all collaborative partners must work toward a common goal to increase organizational or program efficiency, effectiveness, or to tackle a community issue. So some examples of collaborations might be administrative alliances, organizational mergers, projects that combine the strengths and perspectives of different organizations. And so just to note that if you're submitting your organization's own application and a collaborative application in the same intake, the two projects will essentially be competing against each other, but that they both will be considered. Just some general information about the application process. As I mentioned, all applications are due by 4:30 p.m. Our application system actually does close at that time. And so after that 4:30 p.m. time, you'll no longer be able to submit your application. Part of the reason for that is we want to make sure that we have staff available to support you through the application process. So applying during office hours does mean that you can access a member of our grants team for help if you need to. So we do encourage you all to begin and complete your application well before the due date. As I've mentioned, but just want to reinforce that you may apply for a community grant and a special program grant in the same calendar year, but it must be for a different project. And just to note that applying for a community grant is a competitive process and organizations are not guaranteed a grant each year. I do want to note that the Winnipeg Foundation reviews all applications based on their merit and does not discriminate on the basis of actual or perceived group characteristics as identified in the Manitoba Human Rights Code. And organizations applying for a grant to the Winnipeg Foundation must also adhere to the Manitoba Human Rights Code. And so if you have any questions about the foundation or our application process, or want to discuss a project before you submit your application, our grant staff is always happy to chat with you by phone or email or in a meeting. So we're always around. All right, a little bit about the application form and process itself. So last fall, we launched our new application portal. Many of you may have already used it to apply for a one-time community grant or a major capital grant this spring. It's much prettier than our last online grant application portal. If you haven't used our new application portal yet, the first thing to do is to set up a profile in the system to access the application. We do encourage you to do this as soon as possible. That part can be done at any time, just to give yourself the time to become familiar with the system, set up your profile. There are video tutorials on our website to walk you through setting up your profile and beginning your application if you need some extra assistance. The good news is once you've set up your profile, it's set up, and going forward, you just need to keep the information up to date. So if you created a profile last year, please make sure that all your organizational documents are up to date. So that includes the list of your board of directors, your most recent financial statements, your AGM minutes, and your most recent operating budget. These documents are all attached to your organizational profile. You don't need to attach them to each application anymore, which we think is a win, but you are responsible for reviewing them each time just to make sure that they're up to date. And we also ask you to review the contact details to make sure that we have the correct contact information on file. So once you've set up your this is what the application looks like. So the information you'd expect, we're looking for the grant request contact. So this is the person we will contact if we have questions specifically about the application. We're also looking for a project summary. So think of this as a pitch. Keep it high level, but meaningful. Even if we funded the project before, explain it as you would to someone who was unfamiliar with it. This is the summary information which we share with donor advisors to help them gauge their interest in supporting your project. We also ask you to identify the project type. There's a drop-down menu to choose from, for example, programming or capital renovation, etc. Cause area. So we also ask you to select from a drop-down menu that best fits your project, for example, arts and culture or health and wellness. And finally, we're looking for an approximate start and end dates. So again, a reminder, the Winnipeg Foundation does not fund projects retroactively, so make sure that your start date is after the date of the grants committee decision. So in this case, it would be sometime after early February 2022. So we also want to know a little bit about the community who's going to be served by your project. So this is the question. Describe the community this project will serve. Please include any relevant information on how your organization is qualified to work with or provide services to this community. So I'm going to go through all of the questions on the application form because some have changed a little bit from previous years. So next, implementation. So we want you to describe how you will implement the project, including specific activities and timelines. This is where you'll build on the summary information provided previously. We want you to describe the involvement of the community served and other organizations in the development and implementation of this project. So tell us how you're working with community or other organizations. In the attachment section, you can upload letters of support from project partners or community members to help strengthen this response. And finally, describe the applicable skills, knowledge, expertise of the staff or volunteers engaged in the implementation of this project. Tell us a little bit more about who's going to be leading the project and delivering it and why they're well suited to do so. So next, we ask you to describe why this project is needed at this time. We're really looking to know, why is this timely? So why does the community or your organization need it now? Evidence of need could be anecdotal, based on survey or observation, or on statistics. Grant-making priorities. I'm going to skip over that question, actually. I think I'm going to get to the outcomes finally. So in point form, we want you to list 1 to 3 outcomes for this project and ask you to identify how you will measure and report back on each. We want you to be realistic. If your request is successful and your organization receives a grant, this is the question against which your final report will be evaluated. Finally, the budget. The online application does have a budget form that we invite you all to complete. You will see a button to access the project budget form, which is embedded right in the application. As part of this, you can enter all actual or anticipated revenue in the fields provided. You'll have an opportunity to select whether funding is confirmed. And there's also a notes area where you can give us a bit more information. For example, under government grants, if you know the specific department, you can include that information as well. We want you to complete both the revenue and the expenses section. And if these don't balance, you will get an error message. A note about that is that in-kind revenue must offset in-kind expenses. So you need to put a value around them in both. So for example, if you're listing volunteer hours as in-kind contributions on the revenue side, make sure you have a corresponding value under expenses. We will be soon posting a video tutorial on our website walking you through the budget form, because this is probably the newest thing for people to figure out as part of our new online application system. So below the budget section is where you will upload any project-specific documents. In the case of renovations, so where applicable, we're looking for quotes for renovations or capital expenses. As I mentioned, we expect a minimum of 2 quotes for these. If your project is a collaboration, we're asking for you to provide a letter from both or all the partners outlining each partner's roles and responsibilities in the design and implementation of the project. These can be separate letters or a single letter signed by the leader of each group. If you are a school division applying using the division's charity number, we need you to work with the school division and ask them to provide a letter confirming that this is a high priority project. There is also some unique steps for individual schools applying using your division's number. And if that applies to you, we invite you to contact a member of our team for more detailed instructions. Finally, we have some optional attachments, cover letter or letters of support. Letters of support are another way to speak to evidence of need as well as community involvement. So again, that could be from other community organizations or individuals. We ask that if you are going to provide letters of support to please select 3 to 5 of your best letters that represent a range of stakeholders. As we've indicated, we receive a lot of applications, so we aren't necessarily able to review lots and lots of supporting documentation, but certainly 3 to 5 letters of support that strengthen your proposal would be welcome. I will note that we see from time to time some of those more generic letters from politicians. Those don't work as well in strengthening your proposal. More detailed letters from collaborative partners or individuals in your community are really the best ways to strengthen your proposal. So once you've completed your application, you'll have the opportunity to view or print your application at any time using a button that you'll see at the top of your screen. When your application is complete, you need to click Submit. If any of the required information is missing, the application will not submit, and you'll see a list of the areas that need to be completed. Once you've filled these in, you can click and submit again. After submission, you will see on your portal homepage, the application now appears under Submitted Applications, and you'll automatically receive an email from the system confirming that your application has been submitted. I should note that applications can be saved and gone back to at any time. You don't need to complete the entire application in one sitting, that there is an option to save and return later. So just some general tips for completing your application. Be concise, clear, and concrete. Try to avoid jargon or acronyms that are specific to your organization or to your field of work. We always ask you to proofread your application or invite a colleague to proofread your application. Another tip is we've heard from many organizations that they'll often prepare their application in a Word document first. So a PDF of questions is available on our website. This allows them to craft their response and then cut and paste into the application form. It's also a good idea in case you get interrupted while completing your application or there's glitches, if your computer's prone to glitches and information might not be saved. So many people do choose to complete the application in Word first, but of course you're also welcome to complete it right in the application system itself. So a final note about application deadlines. As I mentioned, the application portal does close at 4:30 p.m. Sharp. Any in-progress applications can't be submitted after the portal closes. Should note that sometimes it can take a few minutes for an application to be submitted. So if you're trying to do it at 4:29 p.m. and there's a lag with your internet or your computer, unfortunately that might not make the 4:30 cutoff. So just give yourself a few extra minutes. We have unfortunately heard from people who've had last minute technical issues, equipment failures, losing internet connection. And so of course we don't want that to happen to you. And so just a final reminder that applications are due at 4:30 p.m. on October 3rd of this year. So a bit about the review process. The review process takes approximately 4 months from the time that you submit your application to when the decisions are made by the grants committee. A grants associate will be assigned to your file. That foundation staff person will read your application just to make sure that all the required information has been included, that you've answered all of the questions. Sometimes we might call you if we need to know a little bit more about your project or if there's points that need to be clarified. And then our grants committee, which is a subcommittee of our board, meets to review and make the final decisions on all grant applications. So a little bit about after the grant decision. So as I noted, grant decisions are made by our grants committee, which is made up of board members and community volunteers. Their decisions are final, and their decision will be communicated to you by our team shortly after the meeting. If your application is successful, you'll receive correspondence from the foundation outlining the purpose of the grant, payment, any conditions that have been placed on the grant. So for example, support of a capital project might be contingent upon other funders confirming support. A note that all letters and correspondence and agreements will be sent via email to the person listed on the application as the highest ranking staff member. So please be sure to check in with this person about the status of your application after February 15th. During the pandemic, we're not asking for hard copies of any documentation, and I think that's probably here to stay even post-pandemic. If a donor has contributed to the grant, you might be asked to provide a letter of thanks that we can pass along to the donor. All of our grant payments are made by automatic deposit, so if we don't have your banking information on file, we will request that. We always invite you to stay in touch with us. Let us know how the project is going. We ask that you inform us if there are any changes in the project as described in the application. So for example, if the purpose of change, staffing, funding sources, that kind of thing. If you have any doubt about the kind of changes that we'd like to know about, just check in with your grants associate who is assigned to your file. Reporting, again, after this intake, we will ask that a satisfactory report be submitted after your project has been completed. Also a note about applications that aren't successful. If you don't receive a grant, you'll be notified by email, and there will be an invitation to follow up with a member of our grants team to see if there was any specific feedback from the committee. We'd encourage you to, we know it's disappointing news if a grant is not successful. So we ask that you take a moment and wait to call when you're best prepared to accept some feedback on your application. And this is where I wrap up the formal part of the presentation. I know that we've given you a lot of information. So for the Q&A, we're going to ask that if you can keep your questions fairly general, we're happy to answer them now. If you have more specific questions, specific to your organization's circumstances, we invite you to connect with a member of our grants team after this session, and they're happy to discuss your circumstances in more detail. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mercy and Carrie, and they're going to read out any questions that we might have gotten during the presentation.
Maybe I'll start, Meg. It's Carrie. We have a question from Sherry, who has 2 project ideas that combined would fall within the threshold for a grant request. She's wondering if that is, or they're wondering if that is allowed, or is it better to focus on one project?
You're going to hear it depends a lot from me. If they're two related projects, so for example, you need to renovate 2 spaces, I think that could be combined into a single application, with the caveat that we might not be able to provide the full amount requested. If it's 2 very different proposals, so for example, you want to renovate a space and launch a new pilot program, we would encourage you to focus on the highest priority project for your organization.
Mercy, do you have any questions on your?
No, go ahead, Carrie. Nothing from me yet.
Okay, one more here. Can someone be working on the budget while another person is writing the proposal at the same time in the portal? Will both of their work be saved?
That's a good question, which I must confess I don't actually know the answer to. As we've mentioned, the system is quite new. I believe that no, if one person is actively in the application, other users would be locked out. So to be safe, I would not have 2 people working on the application at the same time. I'd have maybe the person working on the questions working in a Word document, and the person working on the budget form being the one in the application itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Meg. A question from here. Can an organization apply for more than one collaborative application?
So really, we would ask organizations you can submit one of your own applications and one collaborative application. If an organization is involved in multiple collaborative projects, it might be best for one of the other collaborative partners to submit the application for the other collaboration. So just to reiterate, per calendar year, organizations may submit one of their own projects and one collaborative project application.
Meg, we do have a question here. Somebody looking for the PDF of the application questions. I'm just taking a quick look on our website and I don't see it. So just a note for everyone attending, we will get that organized and up on our website.
Yeah, thank you.
Question here. Will this grant supports new employment positions needed in an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So certainly we have a wide range of eligible projects, and staffing would be an eligible project. Anytime, because we're a project funder and not an ongoing funder, anytime someone is requesting funds to establish a new staff person, we would want to know how your organization intends, if it's not a term position, we'd want to know how your organization intends to sustain and fund that position beyond the terms of the Winnipeg Foundation grant. It's a great question though.
Meg, I have another question here wondering about the Foundation's new strat plan and when that will be released.
Yeah, so we're currently working on it now, and we hope to have the new strat plan released to community in early 2023. Part of that strat plan will involve vital signs. Many of you might remember the Vital Signs project that the Winnipeg Foundation embarked on a few years ago, and we're currently in the midst of compiling a new Vital Signs report to reflect where our community is at today. And so we're working on that Vital Signs report, which will also inform the strat plan. So our timelines are, again, early in the new year.
Thank you. I have one more here, a little bit specific, but somebody is inquiring about whether assessment and modification of an existing program would be eligible for a grant. For example, hiring a consultant to assess an existing program, identify difficulties, or things that need to be changed?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the examples I provided was evaluation, and I think assessment would be another type of project request that would be eligible for a one-time community grant. So again, working with a consultant or bringing someone in to help you assess a program would be an eligible project.
Thank you.
Hi, Meg, question here. Will a grant support hiring a landscape architect alongside funding community consultation to ensure project meets community needs?
Yes, that sounds like a fun project. But yes, any sort of project planning expenses would be something we would consider through our one-time community grants. And I would see that those the community consultations and the hiring of a landscape architect as two related items for the same project. So those could go in the same proposal.
I have no new questions here. Mercy, do you have any others?
Nothing from me, Carrie.
Well, maybe we'll give one more minute for anybody who, like me, is a little bit of a slow typer. But in the meantime, I want to thank all of you for joining us today to learn a little bit more about our current intake of one-time community grants. And as I've said throughout the presentation, we're always happy to chat with you after the presentation. If you have more detailed questions about your organization's specific circumstances, or you something wasn't clear from the presentation, we're happy to have that conversation with you. So while I was saying that, did any last minute questions come in?
Sorry, Meg, just 30 seconds. There's a question that is being formed right now.
Okay. See, I have sympathy for the slow typers. That's me.
Okay, here's a question. So once the grant is approved and decision is made in February 2023, how long until the auto deposit is made?
Until the
deposit of the grants fund.
Oh, usually grants are paid within about a month of the grant's decision, depending on the timing of the decision.
Thank you.
It may take a bit longer for those organizations where we don't have your direct deposit information on file, because it takes us a little bit to get set up. But for the most part, payments would be within a month of grant notification.
Thanks.
Great.
Oh, one more follow-up question. Once you've received the grant and approval, how long is the term for the one-time community project?
Yeah, so our guidelines state that organizations have, up to 2 years to complete a project. That said, we know things happen, and so there can certainly be flexibility within that. We'd really be looking to you and the project timelines that you outlined in your project application. So the most typical timeline people put is kind of a year. Some projects are 9 months, some projects are 18 months, but we don't have any hard and fast rules of when the funds need to be allocated by. Many of you might be familiar with government funders who often have kind of year-end requirements, and we don't have any of those requirements.
Great, thank you. 2 questions. One is, once a grant has been approved, but before the funding has been received, can you start work on the project?
Yes, absolutely. So our guidelines are, once a grant is approved, you can start right away, confident that in a few weeks, the foundation's funding will follow. So no, you don't, unless for your own organization's purposes, you need to wait for the funds to be received. From our perspective, you can start as soon as you receive notification of decision.
And the last question from me, how much is the maximum grant funding that you can receive with a one-time community grant?
Yeah, so the maximum amount available is $100,000. But as I mentioned in the presentation, kind of the average grant is $35,000. That doesn't mean we won't do more or less. But again, the maximum you can request through this intake is $100,000. All right.
Okay, sorry, 2 questions here. First one, does the amount of the application have any impact and consideration, and how is the final funding amounts determined? So I assume if you receive the full 100,000 versus partial, how is that determined?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand.
Yes. Does the amount of the application have any impact on the consideration? And how is the final funding amounts determined?
Yeah, so I think that person's asking if the amount being requested of the foundation has an effect on the assessment of the proposal. And it does, because it ties into the next part in terms of how we assess, how much to allocate for a project. And so sometimes the amount requested is so far from where the Winnipeg Foundation is able to make a contribution that it would be unlikely that a project would move forward. So sometimes if a request is too large and we can't meet it, that would certainly impact the assessment of the application. I think it's also worth noting that grant history is always a consideration. And so grant history, it's also, that's the kind of get to know you. It's the opportunity for an organization to get to know us as a funder and for us to get to know you as a community organization. And so we do recommend that if this is your very first application to the Winnipeg Foundation, if you haven't received funding from us in the past, we would advise people to keep the amount that they're requesting closer to the average amount as opposed to the maximum amount. It would be very rare for us to award a $100,000 grant to a first-time applicant. So certainly the amount being requested is a factor in the assessment of the proposal. I hope that answers the question. I don't know if that person has follow-ups.
Not a question here. If this is a long-term project, can it be done in a phased approach, including a request for the next phase to be completed in the following year?
Yes, absolutely. We often fund phased projects. And if that is your circumstance, so say you're applying to phase 1 and you anticipate submitting a second application to the foundation for phase 2, it is helpful to note in your application both that it is a phased project and to give, you want to focus on the phase that you're applying for currently, but it is helpful for us to have an understanding of the proposed future phases, as well as an indication of if you're going to be requesting or submitting future applications for future phases. That's all helpful for us to know. Those were
Nothing
all.
further from me.
Okay. Any more questions posed to Carrie?
No.
All right. So again, for some of those who maybe had to join the presentation a little bit late, the session is recorded and it will be made available on our website likely early next week. So if you did miss the beginning of the presentation, you're welcome to watch the recording at a time that's more convenient for you. And once again, if you do have any questions that weren't covered in the proposal, if you have any questions that aren't addressed in this presentation, feel free to reach out to our staff and we'd be happy to answer your questions that you have. All right. So if that's the end of the questions, I do want to thank Sandra for joining us today and providing ASL interpretation for community, and want to thank you all for spending some time with us this morning to learn a little bit more about our community grants program. So I hope you all have a good rest of your day.